Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the 2020 Hermana virtual conference. We are so pleased to have a really important and timely discussion with our friends today. By now, we are all aware of how back to school is impacting all of our lives. First, when school shut down in the March-April timeframe, and we all had to adjust to life at home, and our only connection being an online connection, if you had one. And this has been so problematic for especially Hispanic students. Only 57% of Hispanic homes and only 58% of African American homes have computers or laptops, according to the Pew Research Center. And that's if they have connectivity at home. While 95% of American households have broadband available, 27% of Americans just don't subscribe, many because they just don't see the importance of having the internet at home. And the economic crisis has brought into sharp focus the problems that families have in trying to stay connected through these times. And so we wanted to have a conversation with our friends. We've got Cesar Moreno Perez, a Senior Associate Director of the Human Rights and Community Relations Department at the American Federation of Teachers, a union representing 1.7 million pre-K through 12th grade teachers, education professionals, college professors, and adjunct instructors. We also have Jackie Puente, the Executive Director for External Affairs for Comcast. Thank you both for being here with us. So let's get into the conversation, Cesar. By now, we are familiar with the catch-22 of family issues, sending children to school with fears of COVID-19 exposure or schooling from home at the expense of a parent working outside the home. For many families, this just isn't an option. How is this magnified for immigrant students and families that have special needs with regards to schooling?
Well, Amy, first, let me thank you and the Hermana Network for the opportunity to join you for this important conversation. It's great to be with you and with Jackie. Individuals are doing amazing work to help, our Latino families through this tough time. So you're 1,000% right? I think families right now across the country are really struggling with making these tough decisions with how, regards to their schooling for their children. In regards to our immigrant students, I think that we have to also acknowledge and recognize that they are part of a vulnerable population that before the pandemic, they were already in the margins. And now with the pandemic, many of them, are not getting the adequate support that they need at home, right? So let's think about it and take a step back, right? What are we looking at and how are we operating, right? I think that, for the AFT in particular, that we've been for months, like sounding the alarm about how is it that we are addressing, the impact of COVID-19 for students and educators and parents, right? That we have to be laser focused, that any reopening plan has to be grounded on science and has to be grounded on and informed by healthcare protocols that are really supposed to inform and guide the discussion, right? So for immigrant students, for example, we think about the backdrop that their families were excluded from any economic relief package that this Congress has adopted. So what does that mean? That means that immigrant families, again, many of them essential workers, were already hurting economically. Now they are not getting any federal assistance. So for students that were in high school, many immigrant students had to, join the workforce, find jobs to actually help meet some of the economic gap that the families were going through. That also means that we're seeing vulnerable populations like migrant students, right? There is that intersection with our immigrant students and those that are migrant farm workers that are also in the same situation. And then we look at what is happening with our differently abled student populations or English language learners. That we cannot forget again that the diversity of our communities also comes with that complexity of understanding, again, that we are, that we have to think about different strategies to address the needs of our Latino families.
That's so true. And we think about, just today, I saw a piece and it was on a Latino immigrant student who was doing his homework from a cell phone in a parking lot of a fast food restaurant, because that's where he could get Wi-Fi connection, and that was the only device that he had. Jackie, when school shut down in the spring, it seems like everyone was caught off guard, and now we've had all this time and we're going back to school, and it doesn't seem like we're any more prepared. It doesn't seem like schools are prepared. It doesn't seem like cities and municipalities are prepared. So what programs are you working on that help families in need get access to broadband?
Yeah, and I completely agree. And Amy, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here today with all of the hermanas around the country that are part of this virtual conference. And, thank you everyone. And Cesar, it's great to have you on this panel too, because, this is a very, I think for many of us, frustrating time. And I'm thinking back that it's been over 10 years since the National Broadband Plan was released. And that plan really was talking about the need to have at-home broadband for all Americans, right? It was before this whole concept of the homework gap and kids falling behind because they couldn't do their homework online. But we've been talking about this situation where families need to have a connection at home for kids to do their homework, for parents to find economic opportunity, much to what Cesar was talking about. And now we compound this with telehealth and the need to have information to stay safe during COVID-19. And so I think this is something where, right after kind of the initial pandemic response and the initial kind of task force was put together, Comcast, like many other companies in our industry, really kind of got doing what we do best, right? And for over 10 years, we've had the Internet Essentials program, where we know what it takes to help connect families and get them online. If the cost barrier has been too high, if they're low-income families, also if they just didn't see the need, and you alluded to that too. One of the reasons why people are not subscribing is because they don't know why they need to have internet. They don't know that their children need to have this. And we see that often is the case with many immigrant families, right, who don't know that if they don't have internet at home, their kids won't be able to compete in schools. And so we doubled down. We made the internet available for 60 days to start for families. So if they did not have internet access, they could basically get 60 days of free high-speed internet in their home. And then we know that the devices are also challenged, so we made access to a netbook, a tablet, a Chromebook available for less than $150. And we found that families, that are taking us up on this great opportunity, they're subscribing, they're doing this now in mass. Obviously, people are going back to school. But we're seeing that this is really an overall community challenge, right? That this is something, and I know Cesar can talk about this, it's as frustrating and challenging for teachers as it is for administrators, as it is for families. And so we're trying to be conveners and good faith conveners here to have families come together with the community, with the schools, and figure out how we can even expand this program even more. And so we're trying to bring everyone together to have this conversation about how not do we just get internet available to these students today for going back to school, or for the first 9 weeks of virtual learning, or for the first half of the year when the school goes virtual. But we see this as a real time to help align all of us to make sure that families have high-speed internet for the entire school year, and more than that, that they are online and connected, and that parents and students can take advantage of all of the great opportunities that come from being online.
It's such a great idea, and it really underscores how companies have really stepped up in a time where we've been lacking, a federal response, a government response, even at times responses from the school districts. And Jackie brought up a great point. So I said, what are the challenges that teachers are facing, particularly those in rural areas who may not even have broadband themselves? How are they adapting to this new world and going back to school themselves?
There's a slew of challenges, right, that are facing rural communities and I think the urban centers. But before I get to that, I think it's important that we recognize, right, that there is, that we're seeing across the country states where cases are rising at a moment where we know that one of the first recommendations that comes out of the CDC guidelines or even the AFT reporting is that in-person schooling should not begin unless a caseload is decreased. Right, so there has to be a plan in place, right? So one of the top of mind, conversations right now is in communities, are they reopening too quickly, right? And are they reopening too quickly without having a plan, a solid plan in place? And that's, I think, what we need to see, how it's impacting communities differently, right? Rural communities already had, lack the infrastructure. I mean, some of the school buildings are dilapidated. Well, we realize that again, the maintenance and the upkeep wasn't there to begin with. And so now what does that mean? Poor ventilation system. Again, they don't have the ability to honor the social distancing recommendations, and they just don't have the resources, right? That's, again, very peculiar to rural communities, but you think about the dairy farms, the agricultural communities, those in the communities that are currently being hit hard with high incidence of COVID cases. That is what's worrying a lot of communities, right? With absent from any federal funding, I think that we need to continue to stress the importance of making sure that districts and communities have the resources in place to really, bring the students and the teachers back in a safe manner, right? So think about what is happening now for the over 130,000 school districts in this country, right? That they're all grappling with this idea of what is, are we doing traditional brick and mortar? Are we doing a hybrid? Are we doing all virtual? I mean, all of this, again, looks very differently that impacts the 60 million student population. And then for the Latino children and then the immigrant student population, again, there are other things that we need to keep in mind to really address those needs. A model that we saw in Washington State, especially in the rural farming communities in Washington, there was school districts, well-intentioned, said, why don't we bring in the Latino, our Latino or ELL or immigrant students that we know need additional support during this time, because we knew that the gap was only widening, right? The opportunity gap was widening for this segment of the population. But what happened with the Latino parents? There was an outcry, actually. I mean, you to see the parents saying, no, we're not utilizing my children, or my kid is not going to be, a guinea pig in this process. Like the district needs to first give parents sort of like the reassurance that there is a plan in place, right? If there is a surge in caseload, are you providing educators and students with PPE? What does all that look like? And I think that that's important for all of us to keep in mind, right? Again, what are we, in our local communities? What does reopening actually look like? And again, things that are unique for some. Are exacerbated in other areas. And the AFT in our most latest report, they laid out 3 key important priorities that are essential that schools need to have when they are reopening, consider having classes in-person classes. One, the low infection rates, right? Adequate testing in any region where in-school learning is being considered. Number 2, right, have the public safeguards to prevent the spread of the virus in the school, including the masks, social distancing, cleaning and ventilation, hand washing, and reasonable accommodations for at-risk and medically fragile personnel and students. We are already hearing from cases in Colorado and in Texas and in Arizona where schools have physically reopened, where teachers were not provided with any PPE, where they haven't made wash stations available, where they haven't provided sanitation gel for the teachers. That means teachers now are going out trying to find and secure their own PPE as they've done before. We know that having getting the classroom material and resources for our students and for themselves is a all too common story and experience for our classroom educators. So I think that this is an opportunity again for school districts and the schools and administrators to really rise to the occasion to ensure that we are protecting the lives of the students and families that they serve. And I think that, I'm reminded of the situation that happened in Arizona, right? Where unfortunately, a 38-year veteran teacher died, and 2 additional colleagues that she shared a classroom with over the summer also, tested positive. Again, we want to avoid reckless reopening plans that don't put the safety and well-being of children and educators first.
Cesar, that is such a great reminder that every year we don't even think about it anymore when we see teachers posting their Amazon wish lists of things that they need for their classrooms. And we know that teachers every single year are pulling money out of their own pockets to make sure that they have the materials and resources in their classrooms. And that's just now compounded with all of the sanitizing wipes and antibacterial gel and all the things that they need. And, we're already underfunding our schools. And so this is such a heavy lift to make sure that schools and teachers and everyone who's in the building, whether it's the janitors, the cafeteria folks, the bus drivers, that everyone has what they need to stay safe in these times. And I want to just mention too, you mentioned the AFT paper that came out early in the spring. You guys were really out in front of this, making sure that everyone understood what the steps were and what was needed to reopen a school safely. And we're going to give that link and that information to everyone who's watching, because they really need to be aware of what their school districts really should be doing in order to get their kids safely back to school. You know, Jackie, you are a mom, you are working full time, you know, you're preparing to send your son back to school. You know, talk about the demands on your time, what the spring was like, the difficulties of keeping up with lessons and schedules and so much more. And, you know, you guys are entering that phase of a split schedule. So this is going to all be new. You know, how are you navigating that? And what are the things that you're thinking about as you get ready to go back to school?
I know, and I'm thinking through this, you know, of all the things that I need to buy. My son goes to a small school in Washington, D.C., and so they send the parents a list of all the things that you need to have when you go back to school, right? And this year, we're buying just more hand sanitizer and more, you know, every student now will have their own crayons and their own markers. There won't be that sharing element. I probably would have done better in a school where there was less sharing required, but you know, I don't know if they're going to miss that lesson altogether, but I think that a part of this right now, right, is making sure that we're not putting so much of this burden on teachers alone, right? And making sure that students know that one of the things you need to have to go back to school is a high-speed internet connection, right? So we always had, and actually today is the kickoff for Comcast, we've always had a back-to-school campaign where we go visit school districts around the country. We're in 6,400 communities. We touch all of these different school districts and make sure that, you know, we're doing our part, that the schools have a high-speed infrastructure. But this is something where we need to connect with teachers, right? The homeroom teacher, the first grade, second grade, fifth grade teacher, and say, you know, when you're talking to these parents, teachers are so trusted, right? That they're able to commit and say, make sure that you have high-speed internet. A part of this is having this PTSD from last spring where, you know, you may not think that your second grader needs to have high-speed internet or to have basic digital literacy skills. But I think this is something that we're finding is very important for all families, right? And for educators. Teachers also need to have this high-speed connection, because even schools that open in person or have a hybrid model, right? To Cesar's point, if the cases go up, we need to be prepared and have backup plans that students can continue learning safely from home, right? And a part of this is making sure that families have the high-speed internet at home and that teachers have the infrastructure and the access to resources so that they can put their curriculums online, because we do want families to be safe. We want teachers to be safe. This is a community safety imperative.
So let's bring this all together, and you know, as we're looking at our final thoughts, from an advocacy standpoint, from the standpoint of a call to action for all of our members, our hermanas, our hermanos watching nationwide. Cesar, where would you say that an advocate in their local community needs to put their efforts?
I think in ensuring that, you know, one, the federal government is doing its role and its job to provide resources and localities with the additional support that they need to ensure, again, that they are meeting the needs of the students and the families that they serve. I mean, the reality is that, you know, we have already seen an impasse, right? That the Senate has not acted on the HEROES Act or their version of a relief package. And so what this is doing, it's forcing school districts to continue to operate with the existing budget, or, you know, that they're gonna have to be making serious cuts and even layoffs. And we know that those layoffs or those serious cuts are impacting the programs that benefit our Latino community, that benefit students that, again, that are vulnerable populations. And so as advocates, I think the Hermana Network plays a huge role, again, in ensuring to serve as, like, you know, the, let's say a watchdog, but to serve as in terms of accountability, to ensure that Latino families are not being left behind in their communities, right? To Jackie's point, we got to make sure that students, every single child, has access to the technology, the Wi-Fi, to make sure that they are, if they're completely turning to remote learning, but that everybody has it. Because right now, not all the families have one device per child, right? It's like one device for like 3 or 4 kids. Now, so you imagine now trying to do your homework or to try to actually get on a schedule that works for all the entire, all the household. It's difficult and it's hard. And sometimes what happens with the Latino families is that many of them are so afraid to to tell their educator, mi hijo no tiene computadora. My child does not have, my son does not have, or daughter does not have a computer at home, right? Because there's this whole thing about, like, el que dirán, right? The public shame of, oh man, my child, I'm not able as a parent to provide the basic, services that my kid needs, to do well in school. And it's unfortunate, but that's a reality, right? That we need to acknowledge that while the statistics are high in terms of students that are lacking access, I think that it's even much greater, especially in situations where families are living in, informal housing arrangements. That, given due to COVID, many of them, again, have been evicted, or we're seeing the moments where they're either getting eviction notices. And for Latino and immigrant families, they've actually already, left that housing situation to go to another place. So we, again, have to continue to advocate for the students to make sure that everybody understands that they have a legal right to a K-12 education, and that the school districts and the schools need to make those accommodations accessible, right? Because we all know separate is not always equal, right? And we know that access is hugely important in ensuring that our students are going to be able to thrive. And so again, I implore the Mana Network to really make sure that they're keeping a close eye in the communities that they are in, to making sure that the students are receiving those services. Because I tell you, Amy, our members are reporting, in the last couple of months, when they were making phone calls and to their parents to figure out, hey, why haven't I had, so-and-so hasn't logged in or hasn't, been, submitting homework. And it turned out, again, that's why you knew that some of the students were actually, in the workforce, that unfortunately were helping the family, or others were distrustful of the technology. They didn't know who was being able to, what that information was being shared with, or who was being shared with, right? The ICE enforcement actions that were happening in communities paralyze communities. It prevents families from being involved and engaged, right? And so many times I talk about, again, the experience from our undocumented immigrant student populations, because we cannot ignore the fact that they are just as vulnerable as our English language learners, and they're not synonymous. To make sure that I stress that the importance of saying that being an English language learner does not necessarily mean that you're an undocumented student, right? So let's not stigmatize that. But it's also the same with our differently able students, that we can't forget about the vulnerabilities, again, that this time has really exposed, so which we always knew, but now have been magnified, tenfold. Again, it's very different from looking at how systems are working in an urban setting and a rural setting, but ensuring that, again, everybody feels connected, right? And I think that in many cases, we've seen the heroic work of educators reaching out to their students in different modalities, right? If they don't have a laptop, then they're calling them. But you imagine giving somebody X number of hours of instruction over the phone? It's like, we have to be cognizant about the situations of our students. We're not all as lucky, right, or fortunate to have, the latest technology or access to broadband. And so we got to make sure, again, that we are doing all we can to advocate for our most vulnerable student populations.
Jackie, as corporations like Comcast and Verizon have really stepped in at a local level to develop sponsor agreements with local school districts, to develop partnerships to make sure that you're extending your services as far as you can. Is there help that you need at a federal level to really make sure that you have the capacity and the things that you need to do to make sure that these school districts stay connected?
Yeah, and 2 things, just to respond to Cesar's first point there. It's not a nice to have or optional. Every student needs to have broadband at home, right? We know this now. And so I will just say, and I really want to hammer this home for your advocates, for the hermanas everywhere, that Internet Essentials is available to all families, right, for free for 60 days. But also undocumented families, you don't need to have a social security number. The information is completely private. It is not shared with any federal agency. And we have many ways now, if you visit internetessentials.com, in Spanish and in English language, to make it easy for families to sign up from a mobile device. You don't need to have a laptop computer to sign up. They can instantaneously make sure that you're available for service, that where you're living, even if it's not your permanent address, right? We are making this as easy for families to get online. And I know that many other broadband providers are doing similar things. And the other thing that we're doing, in addition to opening up Wi-Fi and making Wi-Fi available across our footprint, and giving away the devices and making devices low cost so that every family can have the number of devices they need for all of their children to go to school. One other important thing we're doing is we're partnering with cities. So in Sacramento, in Chicago, in Atlanta, in Philadelphia, and now in Baltimore as well, we're making sponsored service agreements available where the school district and Comcast are picking up the tab for 12 to 14 months of internet for these families so that they don't have to worry about what happens after 60 days. They don't have to worry about the rigorous sign-up process themselves. But we think that the Congress should act on the CARES Act to provide an emergency broadband benefit to all Americans, especially during this economic hard time. No parent should have to choose between feeding their kids and getting them an education. And I think that's a really important takeaway, Cesar, is that this is something that we can do and we can work together to achieve, and that we have great partners and advocates. And I know Amy Mana has been involved in this, as many other organizations have as well. We can get broadband out to these families and show them that this, not just the students benefit, but parents can start working from home. We know that only 18% of Latinos right now can work from home comfortably. And we need to increase that number with parents having jobs that are technology enabled. So by putting an internet connection in the home, we're not just going to help these students, we're going to help the parents get better jobs. We're going to help everyone stay home and stay safe during this time. And we can have a real impact on the community.
Yeah, that is very critical. I think what Jackie is highlighting, again, the importance of having that access, right, to the technology and the resources that really helps the entire family, right? I think that we also need in that, to build up on that, right? School districts need to make that commitment to the parents so that they understand what e-learning platforms they're utilizing, right? Because many times the parents themselves don't know, what e-learning platform the school or is implementing that their child has to get into, right? So I think making sure that the parent liaison or that educators, again, are equipped to share that information with the parents and the families, right? So as the districts, they comprometer, right? They have to make that commitment to ensuring that there are any bureaucratic barriers so the families know, again, what is an easy way, right, to access, whether it's going to be on the tablet, on the computer, or by phone. There is a way. And in the same token, I think educators also need professional development, on the different modalities for e-learning, right? I think, and I stress again that it's like, there are things, right? There's that magic that happens in the classroom that doesn't translate onto the, to online, right? So like educators are able to look into a child and figure out, if something is wrong, right? Something is wrong at the household, if something else is going on in their lives that is impeding their educational success. And so I think that now educators need to be able to pick up on those signals as well, during, these virtual platforms. I think I think it need, but sometimes when we say educators need PD, some of the administrators are like, oh, here we go, unqualified. Like, no, everybody needs it. We're all adapting as best we can. So we just need to make sure, again, that we are facilitating, again, the access and engagement.
Yeah, and if I can just add one more thing, I think we all want everyone to go back to the classroom, right? I desperately want my son back in school 5 days a week, so that I can go back to work and do all the work that I have to do and not be, teachers are so important. Last year, I learned I was not a second grade teacher, right? There are special people who are second grade teachers. That's not me. But at the same time, I think that we're learning now that we need to be prepared for our communities to be more resilient. And this is about community resilience, right? And so I think that I will make sure that Amy and the entire, Mana organization has the list of cities where we've created these sponsor agreements, because it's hard, we know that these are the hardest, if you don't have broadband at home, you're the hardest community to reach, right? You are the most skeptic of companies, of the government, of everyone, maybe except for your teachers and your church community. So we need to make sure that people know that these programs are available for them to take full advantage of them, and then really help get them there so that they can take control of this and be more resilient communities, which is something that we all want.
We all know that schools will need more, not less funding, right? We can't forfeit or shortchange our future. We need Congress to pass the HEROES Act. The things that Jackie and I mentioned, throughout this conversation and that Amy highlighted are pieces of elements that are in the HEROES Act, right? It is immigrant inclusive policies that ensures that the hardest hit by this pandemic, Black and brown families, working families, will have again the support, that they're not left out in the cold. So we need to make sure that the Hermanas Network, contact your friends and your family and ensure that they're calling the senators and tell them to get to work. That we need a relief package that takes care of the families that have been keeping this country running during this difficult and hard time. It is not the time right now to take a break. It is time for them to do their job. So I implore you to make sure you call your senator, take action. We need leadership. Y si se puede. Thank you.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been such a great conversation, and I think everyone can see why the two of you are two of my favorite people to work with here in Washington, because not only do you do great work, but your hearts are really in the right place and always standing behind our community. We want to make sure that our students can go back to school in a safe environment, and even if they're not in school, that they have access at home to be able to do all the things that they need to be able to do to live healthy and productive lives, and that their families are connected. And so we're going to continue this work. We're going to put all the resources that Jackie and Cesar described on the Hermana website, www.hermana.org, and continue to follow us on social media, Twitter and Facebook at Mana National, so that you can stay up to date. And when it's time for that call to action, we need for you to mobilize. Thanks for joining us for this conversation, and enjoy the rest of the conference.